I think you know everyone up here, or if not.
I do. I think I've actually met everybody here on at least informally, with the exception of Mr. Feraldi. I don't think we have. It's Sandusky. Okay.
So we won't go through the formality of introducing ourselves. It's almost kind of awkward at this point, but welcome and thank you very much for your willingness to serve on Lynchburg City School Board. We have a few questions for you, and I'm going to start with Councilmember Nelson.
Okay.
Thank you,
Down the
Madam
row.
Mayor. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you.
I want to thank you for your interest and willingness to serve on the school board. I have a question relating to the degree of fortitude you would demonstrate in holding the school administration accountable on policies and decisions. For many years, the Lynchburg City School Board has approved the administration's budgets, policies, and proposals without materially questioning them. If you were a member of the school board, would you hold the LCS administration professionally accountable to ensure that LCS steadfastly promotes the philosophies and principles and goals embraced in their mission statement, every child by name and by need to graduation?
Well, I think in any professional capacity that we serve in, there's going to be a level of accountability that people need to reach, and questions that you're going to have to answer to ensure that we are in fact upholding whatever those rules and regulations or expectations happen to be. Am I answering what you're asking?
You are certainly answering the question. I guess my primary focus of this question is whether or not you would be guided by your own skills and qualifications to question what the administration says and not approve it simply because it's coming from the administration.
I think so, and I don't mean that in a negative fashion, but I think that anytime, whether we're talking about family, friends, colleagues, whatever, that we hold each other accountable. And that doesn't mean necessarily in a negative way, but simply in a, let me ask you a question. I need to make sure that we understand, where we're coming from. So from that degree, I would think that all of us, as you are held accountable. I don't think that should ever be in a way that is insulting, demeaning at all to people, to each other, but I certainly think we need to hold each other accountable for certain things.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for interviewing. As a retired educator within the Lynchburg City Schools, having been removed for several years and working in another school division, do you see the need for the ability to teach in the schools, having experience of urban education teaching, understanding the diversity of the demographics of students and families in Lynchburg City Schools? And how do you see Lynchburg City Schools meeting its achievement gap issues with the students, as well as bridging the gap in the communities?
I think that we, as a city, have changed over a period of years, and I've been a long-time educator. I think as a city we've changed over a period of time, a period of years. I also think that we, and I probably have said this to some of you before. I remember once when I was teaching at EC Glass and I came home fussing about something one of my students did. And one of my sons said to me very wisely, "Mom, you think everybody grows up like we do, don't you? Everybody doesn't have a mom and dad at home." And it was kind of a wake-up call to me, because I do know that intellectually. I know that. But what I wasn't considering is that my expectations might not have been realistic for a student who did not have what my son had at that moment. And so I think it's a wake-up call for all of us, that we need to be aware that there are students who have difficulties that we never had, sometimes can't imagine, that are foreign nature to us. And so we have to have conversations and develop relationships with teachers, students, parents, so that we do understand where people are coming from. Am I answering what you're asking, Trinae?
Thank you.
I hope I am.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good to see you today.
Good to see you.
You probably heard that report that came out yesterday from the state, how terrible the learning loss was, and they measured from 2017 to 2019, where 8th graders are, predominantly illiterate, they can't read. This is the Commonwealth of Virginia public schools. With that, this is even before COVID. So do you think it's
Were
going
the
to be
results before COVID or?
2019?
Okay.
So this is before that even, and I got a feeling it's going to be horrendous if they were to do it today. If you were on the school board back then, would you have done something differently, or would you have gone with the majority to close schools and require masks and requiring distance learning and all those different things?
It's difficult for me to not speak as a parent. While I want all students to be educated, more importantly for me is that all those students are alive. And so it would be very difficult for me to say, well, we're not gonna worry about this COVID thing right now. We're gonna make sure that everybody gets educated. I think that has to be considered. Now, where we land when we make that consideration might be different depending on where we are, where COVID is, how it's impacting our community, but it's certainly something that has to be considered.
So do you think that's a good thing as a parent to have kids learning remotely?
Do I think it's a good thing? I think it's better than not having them learn at all. But do I think it's the same as being in a classroom where there's a teacher that's going to be right there and ask you questions and look at that smile or frown on your face and be able to identify where you are at that moment and meet that person's needs? I would have to say no, that's not ideal. But it might be warranted depending on what situation we find ourselves in.
So I just want to piggyback off of Councilmember Nelson's question to you about accountability a little bit. Some current school board members have expressed concerns about the school board's operations being reactionary rather than challenging to the directives of administration, and not really challenging what's happening. And my question to you would be, what, if this is a fact, what would you do to rectify it? How would you change that? You're sitting there with 8 other folks and superintendent.
Please ask me the question again, because I'm not sure I'm understanding exactly what the meat of the question is.
Okay, the meat of the question is, well, see if I can figure out how to word it. Some of the school board members feel like the majority of the current school board it does not challenge administration enough. So my question to you is, how would you change that? What would be your posture when you're sitting in a meeting to challenge somebody who's come up with something that you feel is not correct or that you can't support?
Well, going back to what Mr. Helgeson said a few moments ago, I would look at what the scores are, where the SOL testing, what it reveals to us about our students. And then I would ensure that instruction is taking place in classrooms on a consistent basis to meet the needs of students. And I think that teachers and administrators have to be held accountable for that taking place. Being a principal is a heavy-duty job because you're responsible for everything from making sure the building is clean, to making sure the kids get fed, to making sure the test scores are what they should be. And I'm looking at you because I'm sure you've experienced some of the ramifications of that. And so it's a big job. It's difficult sometimes to prioritize some of those things, but as a former principal, my primary responsibility is to ensure that students are learning. And so I have to do what I can do to ensure that happens. And it is my area of expertise. I am not an expert cook, so I can't really comment a whole lot about what the lunches look like, taste like, smell like. That's not my thing. I'm not I'm not a maintenance worker, so while I can say this floor doesn't look clean, that's not my domain. My domain is understanding what good instruction looks like, what relationships between teacher and students and how they impact what learning takes place. And so my job is to ensure that that takes place. And whatever I need to do as a school board member, as an administrator, as a teacher, to ensure that that takes place is what my primary responsibility has to be.
So you feel that you would stand up and challenge other school board members if you felt that?
If I thought that students were
Yeah.
not learning because I'm a teacher, because we're not doing what we need to do in a classroom, then I would question that. When you say challenge somehow has some negative ramifications sometimes, or connotations sometimes. Challenge is not, probably wouldn't be the word that I would use. Would I question? Would I say, I'm looking at the scores in your building and they are not equivalent to the scores in that building? Or I'm looking at the scores in your classroom and they don't seem to be on the same level as the person next to you. Or I'm looking at the scores of all the boys in your room and those scores don't seem to be compatible with the scores for the girls in your room. Let's talk about that. Let's figure out what's going on here so we can make some changes, because I learn from you and you learn from me. And so we have to consider all of those things.
Thank you. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Ms. Preston, for coming. Can you remind us where you were a principal?
I was a principal at Amelon, and after I sent in my application, I realized that my resume was a little bit outdated. And so I made some copies. I hope it's okay if I give you these.
Please.
Although I already started passing them out. But
Here, you want me to pass them and you can go sit down?
oh, yes, that's him.
I feel like
I'll
we're-
give it to you, and I'll keep a copy.
I feel like we're in your class.
I know.
Thank you very much. All right, there we are. Thank you. Yes, exactly. Indeed. Oh, that's right. Remind me where the pencil sharpener is?
So I have been a principal at Amelon Elementary School.
Very
I
good.
was a high school teacher, but a principal at Amelon Elementary School.
Okay. So I'm sure you're well aware of this, that Lynchburg, not unlike many school divisions across the country, is having challenges with recruitment and retention. This is not just true for our line staff, the teachers and bus drivers and maintenance workers. It's also, of course, true for administration. There have been some notable high-level departures within the past several years that have not been replaced. Scale of 1 to 10, 1 being you can hang out on the beach, no worries, to 10, you are deeply, deeply concerned. Where are you on the register of retention for the school division and recruitment of high-quality folks?
I would have to say I'm somewhere between a 7 and 8. And the reason for that is partly because it's a different time in my life. My children are college graduates, so it's not immediate, angst for me like it might be for you, for example, because we're talking about a whole different age group.
Sure.
And so, so to that degree, but am I concerned about the students in this area? Absolutely. Absolutely, because this is where I live. These are the children that I'm going to encounter as young adults. They're the ones that are going to be taking care of me when you send me to the nursing home. I need to be worried. I need to be worried that they're going to be educated, well-educated, reliable, responsible, and doing the things that they need to do to be productive members of our society. So yes, I'm concerned about that.
And can I ask a follow-up? As a board member, how would you approach that question? What are there particular strategies you have in mind? What level of urgency would you undertake that work with?
I think one of the things I do is ask questions. If I want to know why you're leaving, the best person to ask is you. You're going to be able to tell me what your concerns are. Now, your concerns could range, and my family's moving out of town. Well, I'm sorry they're moving, but that's not something that we, Lynchburg City Schools, caused, so to speak, or not directly caused, or perhaps did not directly cause. And so I would weigh that differently than if you said, I'm leaving because this job just is not working for me because I'm not getting the level of support that I need, or I'm not being compensated financially for what I'm expected to do. That's something that's under your under your umbrella that we can do something about. Am I answering what you're asking, Mr. Wright?
You are indeed. I think it's, you are. Actually, the question of exit interviews has been something of a tricky one, I think. I'm still not entirely sure whether we are in fact conducting exit. Perhaps we are, and I just don't know it. But you have addressed my question. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Dr. Wilder.
Yes, thank you again for volunteering your service. We really appreciate it, and the years you've given to education, so we appreciate that. Could you articulate your understanding of the role of a school board member, and also given the current environment where there's so much information coming about the schools are declining or various things that don't, some of them may be true pictures, some of them may not be true pictures, but as a school board member, how would you address that? So do you understand your role as a school board member, and how would you address so much negative information coming towards a school board member and the school board system?
Well, I think the school board's role is to oversee the educational system in the city of Lynchburg. That includes the impact of the education. It includes the level of education that our students are receiving. It includes the perception of the school system by the citizens of our community. And so I think that the role is a broad role of doing lots of things in lots of different ways. I think it's important that we are strategic in the way that we address the problems that occur, the concerns that we have. I also think it's important that we select carefully our ways of having those conversations out in our community. Because the very same thing that I might say to you privately, if I said it to you openly, might be perceived differently unless I'm assured that I'm making myself clear. And sometimes when it's a fly-by-night question and you answer it quickly to somebody who doesn't know you well or know the situation well, sometimes that can be misunderstood. And so I think it's really careful that we stop and we think and we consider the audience, and I'm thinking like a teacher now, that we consider the audience with whom we're speaking, so we ensure that we are in fact sending the message that we want to send. And I don't mean that we're sending a message just, to make ourselves look good, but we're sending a message that we want to send.
Great. All right, thank you, appreciate it.
Ms. Preston, one of the priorities for me in appointing a school board member is related to what I believe the core disciplines of academics. I think there's a lot of emphasis put in many different directions that maybe have pulled our direction away from those. In my view, that's math, history, English, and science. And as has been kindly pointed out by some applicants, and especially coming from a family of educators from a musical perspective, certainly the arts play a significant role, but primarily those four areas. So how will you be an advocate for putting strong emphasis on math, history, science, and English? How also will you strive for accountability to achieve superior results or goals in those areas?
I think students' perception of education is a learned and learning experience. And so as a teacher, as a community, as a city council member, as a board member, we need to make students understand that regardless of what you choose to do with your life, there are going to be opportunities for you to use the kinds of things that you're learning in the classroom. And that goes back to educational strategy. Now, whether I'm going to be a quarterback or whether I'm going to be a mathematician, I need to know some math. Otherwise, I'm not going to score the touchdown, and I'm not going to be able to handle the finances in the bank that I've gone to work with. So, but again, that goes back to relationships. We need to connect with our children so that we can say, you know, I get that you don't like math, but what you need to understand is that there are obvious times and places when this math is going to be important. Now, do you need to know the same kind of math or perhaps even the same level of math? Maybe not as much as if you were going to do A, but you got to know some of it because you're not going to be able to do whatever it is that your goal happens to be in life. But again, that's conversation. You got to talk to people where they are so they understand where you're coming from. What's this got to do with me? Because that's a lot of how kids relate to what they learn. What's it got to do with me? I remember teaching Romeo and Juliet, and I may have said this to some of you before, but I remember teaching Romeo and Juliet, and when I would teach Romeo and Juliet, the first thing that I would do was say, how many of you have ever had a boyfriend or a girlfriend your parents didn't like? Now, who in this room is that true of? You know, there's always going to be that. So then it's about, so this isn't about some guy that wrote in this language that I don't understand. This is about something I can relate to, I can identify with. It's got something to do with me. And so then they automatically kind of tune in. And so it's, you know, you got to make it relevant.
So if those relationships are not able to be built for whatever reason, how would you then hold the accountability piece with those
Well,
you'd be looking to supervise?
Some of it, as I say, it is learned behavior. You pick it up because you've been around education for a while and you just learn stuff. Some of it can happen through staff development. Some of it can happen through having conversations with other educators or just other people in general, because that's not just true in a classroom. That's probably true in whatever job it is that you have. That you gotta be able to talk to people on a level that they can connect with you if you wanna get something done. That's not just in a classroom. So it's just establishing those kinds of relationships and making people understand why it's necessary.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. You know, City Council regularly hears local businesses and employers talk about the vast inadequacy of vocational and skilled labor in this area. They just can't find enough vocational employees. You've been with the Lynchburg City Schools and area schools for some time. I think you know them fairly well. How would you rate the acceptability of the trade and vocational programs that the school division offers?
I would say that there's more emphasis on that than there has been at some times in the past. I think that there are opportunities for us as a city to make connections with those people who are going to employ our students, because they have some skin in the game too. They want people that can do whatever it is that their job is. And so if we can make some kind of connections with them so that they can in fact help us to create some kind of incentives that are going to encourage or motivate our students to be involved in whatever that trade happens to be, then that's helping all of us. That's helping them, it's helping us, it's helping our students. And we all know that there are some trades for which we could have made a heck of a lot more money than I could have in a classroom situation. And so if that's the motivator, then we need to have those kinds of conversations. You know, I've thought about this a lot because the average kid, middle school kid, if you ask him what he wants to be, I'm not talking about the academics now, I'm talking about the average kid. If you ask him what he wants to be, he's gonna say, I want to be the quarterback on the football team. I want to be able to be the next, I don't know, I can't think of a LeBron James. That's what I want to be. The truth of the matter is, unless you got the right gene pool, that ain't gonna happen. It's not gonna happen. But they are convinced that if I practice long enough, and there's some truth to that. You might be able to get into a college somewhere and play, but are you going to make big bucks doing it? Probably not. But the point is, some coach somewhere has encouraged them, has told them that it can happen, that they can do it. But we, whoever that is, maybe we're not doing enough of that with our other kids. Or maybe we're not doing it in every field of expertise, because it's a broad scope of things. I gotta motivate the LeBrons, but I also gotta motivate the Randy Nelsons, because they want to be in law. But I also got to motivate the guy that wants to have his own business where he encourages kids to come so that they can learn. I got to encourage all of them. So I got to think outside the box and do a little bit of all of that. And sometimes that means that it's bring in somebody besides Mrs. Preston who doesn't have a clue. I don't know, a goal from a, whatever. That's not going to work. But if you talk to my husband and bring him in, he's going to be able to explain to you why this tennis racket's important, or why you got to shoot so many points, or how come the touchdown is really critical. Because he could relate to them on a far different level than I can. And that's important. And I know I'm going around in circles, and I apologize for that, but.
Ms. Preston, I want to follow up on your answer to that. Yesterday, I was in a meeting, and it was reported to me, to my astonishment, I must say, that the very established George Washington High School in Danville had a vocational program, extensive program. And within the last month and a half, they auctioned off all of their equipment in their carpentry and vocational automotive departments.
Wow.
Every screwdriver, every vise, every forklift, and they don't have any vocational programs anymore at GW Danville. The reason given was they don't have anybody who can teach the courses, so they can't have them. If that be the situation in Danville, what do you think is an appropriate way that our school division needs to be proactive to ensure that we never follow that same path?
Well, the first thing that pops into my mind is we need to explore how we can make that work. Because there are people in our community who could probably teach this kid welding, but couldn't necessarily do the academic part. He didn't know a subject from a verb and all that. So there's got to be some collaboration between that person who's teaching what this kid wants to know and is going to make a difference in his life, so that, in fact, I am teaching in a way that reaches this kid, but also motivates this kid. And I'm going to use my husband for an example again, so pretend that didn't go outside of this room. But because he does coach, and he comes home sometimes and tells me about coaching somebody and such and such and such, and I'll say, Donnie, you need to try this strategy. This is what works in the classroom. Get John to talk to Bob, who's both are on the tennis team, so that they are comparing A, B, and C. I don't know anything about tennis, but I know teaching strategies. So I can teach him a teaching strategy while he tries to teach me something about tennis. And hopefully that's going to benefit the kids. And again, I know that's very random, but if we had a specific example of a child or a situation that we needed to look at, then we would explore that, because we know people in the community who can and do help our kids to do the things that they want to do, need to do, and can learn to do in a way that's going to motivate them. I remember a situation when I was director of student services here in Lynchburg, and there was a young man who got into some serious trouble because he had destroyed some property on one of the streets here in Lynchburg. As it turned out, he could only go to school a certain number of hours per day. I had a conversation with his mother, who was very concerned about this, and so I asked her if she had a problem with him doing A, B, and C. As it turned out, we have a friend who is a builder. So the builder with mom's permission, help this kid fix what he had torn down. Now, the advantage to that was twofold. One is he learned a lesson from this experience. If you don't want to fix it, you probably shouldn't mess it up. That's number one. And number two, this guy right here knows about building. So if that's something turns out that you're interested in, now you got a connection with this person, so you can go about learning a trade that will be productive and beneficial to you in your life. So we got to think outside the box. Is that easy? Nope. Nope.
Thank you, Ms. Preston.
It is not.
Thank you. I'm going to follow up a little bit on my end to that answer, because you were very intentional on one part of that answer, talking about vocational skills, giving a specific Lynchburg City Schools an example. Industry experts or industry professionals do not want to leave their six-figure job business or six-figure salary to take a teacher stipend. So that is why a lot of these programs have gone by the wayside, because people are making more money in private business than they are in the school. So that's a financial thing that I know personally the Lynchburg City Schools experienced in not being able to get a teacher for a particular vocational program. But they do offer a lot of vocational programs, the most in our region that I can verify, definitely. And it is the inability, as you said, of students to take advantage of that and to match their schedules in alignment with the diploma they're going for in some instances. And again, the relationship. But it is a budgetary issue in most instances, which is why if they can't find an auto mechanic to leave his business or leave his profession to come teach, that has been the issue in most cases previously vocational. But getting away from that piece, I would like to delve into your resume piece because of your experience as a principal. Often the community is very combative with the school system about the scores of students on the SOLs, the graduation rates. And as a principal, you have had to be responsible for those outcomes of scores for your students at the elementary level. Then as the Director of Student Services, Supervisor of Technology, development of the division's gifted education plans, and another school division, you understand the actual learning of students to meet the requirements of testing and or how to delve into the scoring of SOLs. You were there when they came into play possibly as an educator, and having seen the changes and or the outcomes of them. How would you as a school board member delve into the scoring of the students in Lynchburg City Schools, the information and data that is given to you in a way to question the instructional methodology of what's going on in the classrooms, the outcomes for the schools? If you just look at the individual schools, how would you use your experience and knowledge in the data piece of it to then begin to advise or work with the school system or question the results and outcomes that students are getting right now, that the schools are getting, that parents are seeing, that community uses as a combative tool for why the city should not invest in education?
I think we have to do some investigation. I think we have to look at, because scores are more than just blanket numbers. There are some patterns of numbers. School A might be doing better than school B, or the scores in this subject area are good and the scores in that subject area are not good. This group of students is doing well while another's not doing well. So my first question would be, let's talk about these scores. Let's take a look at them and delve into them and see if we see any patterns here that need to be addressed, because then the people that are actually doing the teaching can have some conversations with each other, and I know that does happen, have some conversations with each other to determine, what am I doing wrong and you're doing well? What do I need to do better at? What is there a way that you're relating to particular students that I'm not? Do I need to establish better relationships with parents, and if so, how do I go about doing that? It's conversational. I think it's relational.
Thank you.
Councilmember Helgeson?
And following up on, and thank you for your resume here. Lots of times decisions are made kind of just simply incrementally. You know, it's just, hey, this is what we did yesterday, so let's do it again. But as I look at your resume and I look at the fact that you last taught in Lynchburg City Schools in 1999, I look back at the time of what's happened since 1999. And let me lay this out for you. With the last time that you taught in Lynchburg, there was 9,413 students in Lynchburg City Schools.
Okay.
Today, this most recent budget was like 7,350 or something that is budgeted for, which means there's thousands of less kids. The number of full-time employees at the time was about 1,320. Today, we're probably over 1,600. The same time frame, there was the same exact number of schools that were in existence back in 1999. No school consolidation, no discussion, no, it's finally now, after thousands of less kids, hundreds more employees, millions of more dollars. As a school board member, what would you do to look at that big picture and not just the increment that says, well, here's what we did last week, let's do it again?
I think we have to look at, and if we're in our communities at all, we have to recognize that some of the challenges that students face today are a lot more challenging, detrimental, than what students might have faced in the year 2000. We have kids who are going through some stuff that is, and that was one of the things that I think that I learned being the director of student services, is that students get in really big trouble for doing A, B, and C. And then when you sit down and listen to the story about why they did A, B, and C, part of me would say, you know what? Even where I am today, I'm not so sure that if this didn't happen to me last night and I came to school today, that I wouldn't have responded in a similar fashion. And I've got a whole lot more job experience and skills than this kid did, because he's dealing with some stuff I've never had to deal with.
So I guess my question, though, is looking at the school board, right, not the individual student. Thousands of less kids,
Okay.
hundreds more employees, and no school consolidation. Now, as a school board member, is that something that you think is very eye-opening, or you think that's just par for the course?
I think it's eye-opening, but I think it's eye-opening about our society rather than about our schools. Our schools, our children need more support than they would have a few years ago. Or
So
certainly
that could
when,
be maybe more the employees. Okay.
Okay.
What about the thousands of less students?
well, I think there's a relationship between those things. There are people in our communities who would look at the fact that we do have some children in our schools that do have some difficulties, and because they have some options, they may choose to homeschool, private school, whatever, that some people, that's not an option for everybody. But those children who remain in Lynchburg City Schools are entitled to, deserving of, and it would be foolish of us not to provide them with the best possible education that we can. Am I answering what you're asking?
No, but I mean, you're free to answer however you want to answer. I mean, it just I guess, which is perfectly fine. But I mean, I'm asking about now. You were on the educational task force. We were looking at the numbers, the enrollments, and the city population has grown, and there's a pretty big metric. Probably about 40% of students in Lynchburg that their families choose something
To
different.
do something different, right.
And which isn't good for those families. Those families would like to be able to save the money. Those families would love nothing better than to have to not pay twice, but to send them to the schools. And that's maybe not an option anymore. Is that something that's troubling, or is that just par for the course in today's society?
I don't know that troubling is the right word, but I think that what we need to be concerned about is ensuring that we are providing the best education for students, the best environment for students, and then when we can do that, then some of those students and some of those families are going to be comfortable in sending their students to Lynchburg City Schools.
Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, I'm going to move on to Vice Mayor Wright.
Thank you. Just, I think there was a statistic earlier about the number of city school employees. I actually think it's not 1,600. It's more closer to about 1,200, according to the most recent budget document. Aside from the issues we've discussed already this evening, are there another issue that gives you significant concern about the way our schools are currently operating, that is in part motivating for you to want to serve on the board?
Do I have concerns? Concerns because I want to ensure that every kid is getting the best education that he can get. Am I concerned that we, whoever that is, that we can do some things differently, better? Yes, I think that there are probably some, but that requires, again, that requires conversation. Let's sit down and talk about it and try to figure out what we could do differently that maybe is going to motivate some other students, that's going to motivate our employees. Yes. Can we get better? Yeah, we can get better.
Well, I know in the interest of time, I'll make sure that you all. Thank you.
Again, thank you so much for coming again. Appreciate it. Just a quick question. What role, Lynchburg has a 20+% poverty rate right now, which is higher than any in our region, so it's a little challenging. What role does poverty play in educating our students? And as a school board member, how would you address that? Thank you.
I think it does play a role because we have students obviously that don't have their needs met, whether we're talking about food or clothes or school supplies or family relationships. There are some students that don't have those needs met. Is that a concern? Yes, it is a concern. But that kind of all goes back to, we were talking about budgetary issues. Some of those concerns we are trying to meet as best we can, some of those concerns, but does that cost money? Absolutely, it does. But is the money well spent or worth it? In my opinion, yes, it is worth it. We've got to spend what we can to encourage and promote the futures of our young people.
Thank you. And I appreciate, I'm sorry. And you said you spend what we can, but how would you, in a physically prudent manner, how would you address that?
By examining where monies can be spent, by looking at the budget and evaluating if there are opportunities for us to change the way money is being spent. Without being specific and without looking at numbers, it's difficult to answer that question, but you got to look at the budget. You got to determine if there are some changes that can be made, and how and where and when will they benefit our students and ultimately our city.
Great. Thank you, appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I do want to correct myself. I read the presentation from the school's website incorrectly. It is, in fact, 1470 is the number of students, or sorry, of staff.
Okay.
So, forgive me. I did. Students. Yeah, that's also true. But I did want to set the record straight.
One per
1470 is the number.
Thank you, Councilmember Ferraldi.
Last year, when you had applied, I'd ask a question about collective bargaining. Forgive me.
I'm sorry, about what?
About collective bargaining and unionization. Do you remember how you responded to that question?
No. Last year? No.
So I'll just ask it again. So Richmond allowed localities and school divisions to entertain unionization with teachers. Is that something that you'd be interested in pursuing? Or would you support it or not support it?
There are certainly times when collective bargaining is helpful. There are times when it's not. To answer that question without doing some research, determining what specifically the objective is or how it's going to be implemented, it's difficult to answer that question.
So would you vote in favor of collective bargaining if it all was favorable in your mind?
If all was favorable, but that's a mighty big if.
Sure.
If, if all was favorable, but without.
And I realize the if with that. The follow-up question is then, how would then you, regardless of how that all looks, if there was a situation where that package between the school union, school division is then presented to council and council says, we can't do that, how would you then resolve that issue? From a fiscal standpoint, primarily. Because at that point, the school division has entered a contract with a third party to say, this is what our benefits, salaries, expectations, work environment, whatever it might be, that if, and then goes to council and says, hey, council, school division said, this is what they're gonna agree to, will you? Well, we didn't sign that agreement, so what happens in your position if we say no to that? Or what do you do as a school board member when you've already committed by your vote to entertain that collective bargaining? I know there's a lot of ifs in that package, but whatever, even if it was 100% of what you wanted and it was all okay in your mind, if for some reason, from a budgetary standpoint, we say no, you can see the issues that arise, and that's one of my concerns with pursuing that, even if it's has everything
I don't
you
think
want.
I can answer that question without knowing more specifics, because we're speaking in generalities. I don't know what that contract looks like. I don't know how many of you agreed to that contract. I don't know what your reason was for agreeing or disagreeing with the contract. So
we wouldn't actually have any say in the matter at all. This would be strictly with the school board and the school union, if you will. And I totally understand there's a lot of ifs associated what that contract looks like, but strictly from a dollar standpoint, if that contract is something that city council is unable to do, what would you do as a school board member to resolve it? Because you've already entered into a legal agreement with a third party.
Well, I'll be honest in saying I don't think that I would enter into a legal agreement without asking some of those questions beforehand, so that I would know what your perception, what your plan was, if in fact I entered into this. Because then that way I would have a better notion of whether or not I'd want to enter into it, or what specific things I'd want to ask for.
Who's playing, councils or the school union?
I'd want to talk to everybody. I'd want to know what the council thinks. I'd want to know what the school board thinks. I'd want to know what the community thinks, so that I have a greater feel for what is it that we're trying to do? What are we trying to accomplish? Who is it going to hinder and or help? And how can we ensure that we're doing the best for the most people?
Sure. Final point on this one. If you can't commit today that you would not entertain a unionization, and I'll explain why from my perspective.
Okay.
If I'm elected to represent a constituency, in my case it's Ward 4, it's the little sliver of town. Well, folks have elected me to make those fiscal decisions, yes or no, up or down.
Okay.
And entering into an agreement with that third party would then take away my ability as the elected representative to make those decisions, and now we're in a conflict. So
Okay.
it's actually limiting the ability of the representative of that constituency, whether it be at large or the district, to actually make those decisions. And so it's from my perspective that I would hope you would oppose that if appointed.
I'm afraid I can't speak to that without being more specific.
Thank you. We are really running behind right now, so if you,
Was that a nice way of saying I talk too much?
no, some of our questions are lengthy, I think. But thank you very much for coming in and sitting for this interview. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
Thank you.